playing for the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues. My oh my.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's go.
Welcome back to the FSS Plus podcast. Jason Churchill here. Joe Doyle is back after a long 3-year vacation. It's good to see you, Joe. It's a big weekend at Future Stars, by the way. Future Star Series with the inaugural New Balance Future Stars Showdown at Globe Life Field in Arlington, the home of the defending world champion Texas Rangers. That is a JUCO event, and JUCO baseball is rather awesome in case you have never partaken. Joe, I think we agree, by the way, on that junior college baseball is really cool. I mean, college baseball in general is awesome, and I think it gets underplayed a little bit in the landscape of sports. But within college baseball, JUCO baseball is pretty special, is it not?
I mean, culturally, JUCO baseball is one of the cooler aspects of college athletics in general. Like, there is a rampant fan base in the JUCO community, and I think just in the baseball community, there's a lot of people that really, really appreciate junior college baseball for everything that it has produced in the past, everything it represents right now. And I've said this to you. I've said this to Jeremy Booth. I've said this to people that have come to me with the idea of covering junior college baseball with more fervent nature. And I say no every time because it is such an intimidating space to get into that I trust people a lot more than myself to get the looks and provide the information that people rely on.
Yeah, you'd want to join them rather than go against them.
Without question.
That's definitely the way that would go. And and maybe we'll do that at Future Stars Series. It's a blank slate at FSS, so maybe that's something we'll do in the future. But stay tuned, futurestarseries.com for more coverage of that event, which is really, really, really cool. And I'm glad we're getting into that as a company in terms of the events portion of the company. But this portion of the company that we like to create content. We like to talk about baseball at all levels, and that's what we're going to do today. Today's show, international free agency, which is very, very much, Joe, in your wheelhouse. But signing day was earlier this week, and it's a signing period, but almost all of it takes place on day one. Not all of it, but almost all of it takes place on day one. So we'll get Joe's take on the class of 2024, which should have been the class of 2023, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
The MLB draft, the age factor in the MLB draft a couple of months ago, or I think it's a couple of months ago, Joe, you put out a model-based mock draft. Part of that model for clubs is the age of the player. And I want to talk about it in today's show a little bit, the age factor, and kind of apply it to the 2024 class a little bit, but just in general, the age factor, how much should that matter? How much should the age of a player matter in evaluating his potential value to an organization, to Major League Baseball, to professional ball in particular, because it is a thing, but how much of a thing should it actually be? And Josh Hader has a new home in the state of Texas. He signed a long-term deal. He got a little more than I thought he would get, Joe, but not entirely surprised. I think I'm just surprised where he landed, Hader landing in Houston with the Astros. Is that a good deal? Is that a bad deal? How does that fit? And when you look at that Astros roster now, kind of what are we thinking for the 2024 season? So we'll get to all that as well. Joe, let's start with international free agency. That's the thing that's been on most folks' mind this week, at least for those that like to dig into scouting and player development and things of that nature. Some of the questions I get before we get into some of the top names and some of the clubs that had a big day Monday. The international period used to be in July. It used to be July 2nd for years and years and years. Now, ignoring the idea that the fact they moved it to January, I don't really love it, but I get why July is not ideal. But the fact that they pushed it back instead of forward kind of angers me. But ignoring that for a second, this period. So I like to think about things, and maybe I'm unique and maybe I'm an idiot. There are only a few opportunities in the calendar for clubs to add talent to their organization. Okay, you get the off season, which you can go get free agents, you can make trades. There's the first half of the season all the way up to the trade deadline. Teams can still make trades, although free agency is not a thing during the season. And then there's the draft in July, and there's this international period. So it's not like it's this constant every single day a club out there can get better. So when you get a period like this opening up, it's rather crucial to the long-term health of organizations. I'm curious right at the top, and this isn't something we talked about, so I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but I think it's a good question. Is there evidence in the success of some of these players that are signed during the international period? Is there evidence that teams that do a consistently solid to great job during the international period are the healthier farm systems, are the healthier organizations? Is there evidence of that, Joe?
That's a good question. I think the best way to look at that, well, the only way that I can really look at that would be with a bias towards proximity and recency.
Mhm.
The Los Angeles Dodgers are one of the best teams in baseball
Mhm.
in scouting the international scene. And I think the other crucial part of this is developing the international scene. Like there is a special tool that goes into developing a 17-year-old from toolsy and talented and twitchy into an actual major league baseball quality level player.
Mhm.
And I think the Dodgers do a really nice job of that. Some other teams, like I think the Padres, have done a nice job of that, but they've also landed some premier talent. The Mets, I think, do a reasonably good job with that. The issue with the Mets is they kind of, at least of late, block those talents from being able to contribute at the big league level. So, and Seattle, I mean, I guess you'd be remiss not to bring up Seattle. Seattle, it seems every year they draft or they land one of these international free agents. They all have been great. They've all developed great. Noelvi Marte is a top 25 prospect in baseball. Julio Rodriguez is a top 10 player in baseball. You look at the reports on Felnine Celestin right now. That's been fantastic. So I think Seattle does a really nice job of developing that type of player. So to answer your question, I don't know if there's a team that necessarily I don't know if success on the international side translates to a healthier farm system, but it does seem like there are haves and have nots in terms of teams that do land those players. And
Mhm.
the haves just generally seem to be better, well run organizations.
Just in general, like it almost
Just
has
in
nothing to do
general.
with the international part, but because they're good at other things, they're also good at this.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're an organization and an ownership group and a front office that understands the importance of acquiring and the value proposition, the value add in adding young controllable talent through those measures and investing in the department, the international scouting department that is so crucial in developing the relationships to land those players. If you're an organization that understands the importance of that, it seems like those are the types of organizations that do better. I mean, you look at some of the organizations that have struggled on the international side. In a lot of ways, they're generally lower TV market, smaller market teams that have kind of been middling for a long time.
Give me a for instance on that one. Like what team sticks out the most that kind of fits that mold that you're talking about there that have struggled a little bit?
I think a team that stands out is the Detroit Tigers. I don't think the Tigers have really done a very nice job over the last
So
10 years, 10 plus years.
hang on. I'm sure you're right. You are right. That team spends money though. Historically, that team has spent money. Now they went through this little period recently where they were trying to build it back up with the Casey Mizes and the Matt Mannings of the world, but they went out and signed Javier Baez to a bunch of money. So that's not a team without money, and they're spending more money this winter as well. That's not a team without money and without a history of spending money. So
There's a
are you
difference.
basically
There's a difference between spending money on the free agent market, injecting major league talent onto your payroll and investing in the practices and processes that are necessary to actually build out a sustainable organization that's built from the ground up. You look at like the difference between look at the Dodgers. The Dodgers not only spend money on infrastructure and leadership and things like that. They spend money at the highest level, and that's why they're so successful. But on the other end of that spectrum, the Tampa Bay Rays don't spend anything on free agency, but they hire the brightest minds and the biggest up and comers in the sport. They poach them away from other organizations and have them lead their amateur scouting and international scouting departments, and it gives them a competitive advantage on the teenage side of player acquisition, if you will. There are teams that are in the middle that spend a lot of money but don't have the processes and practices in place to actually make it an efficient operation when it comes to player acquisition on the amateur side. So I just don't think Detroit has done a very good job of, one, acquiring those players, but two, you look at the big league club developing their own talent that they've drafted in the Rule 4 draft either.
Yeah, that's been a little bit of a challenge. Now we'll see if that turns around. They took Max Clark a year ago. They got some guys coming up: Jackson Jobe, Jace Young, Kevin McGonigal, Colt Keith. Some guys. We'll see if they're starting to turn that around. But that's a really good point. One thing you notice when you look at Detroit's farm system is there are not very many international free agent signings from the amateur side over there that seem to be kind of peaking its way, toward the major leagues. So that's a really good point. By the way, a little segue here. Joe, your organizational top 30s are getting close. I just wanted to tease that. So if you're looking for prospect rankings, Joe's got you covered. We'll get those going sometime in the middle of February. So we're just 3 weeks out. We're certainly
I'll give you another segue. My top 100 overall is going to piss off a lot of people.
I love it. So let me ask you that: is it gonna piss off me?
Probably not. I mean, there's a guy on the top 100 that nobody else has on their top 100 for public boards.
Okay.
And it's a Seattle guy, and I know you live out in Seattle, so. But there are guys that people have in the top 50 that won't be on my board.
Yeah. Right. I get it. This is why we do this sort of thing. This is interesting. And this one. So Detroit, that's really interesting because they're kind of a mid-market, but they have spent money. But you're right. It's been free agent money. It's been big league free agent money on guys like Baez and things of that nature. All right. So it was Monday when all of this came down. All those agreements are for international, for amateurs. All those agreements are in place. And essentially Monday becomes the first day they can sign, or that they can agree and officially sign. And those usually get signed within 24 to 48 hours, if not right on that day. Talk about some of the top names and where they landed. And then we'll get into which teams, you kind of think did the best in this year's international cycle.
Yeah, I mean, the top guy, I think most people would agree, Leo Dallas DeVries he's an exceptional player, 6'1", 190 pounds, still just 17 years old, already very physical, all of the traits and actions that you could ever ask for at the shortstop position. He goes to the Padres. I'm very excited about this kid. I mean, he's got all of the tools necessary to be a 5-tool superstar in the league. Now, the question with every single one of these international guys is always, will he hit? Will they hit? And DeVries has been more of a showcase pony than he's been an actual tournament performer. But I think most people buy into the tools and the athletic ability for him to be, a top 25 prospect in the league just one calendar year from now. So he's the guy that immediately stands out.
Right. So the Padres, really quick before you move on to the next player, the Padres
seem to know what they're doing.
At least recently. You get Ethan Salas last year, but it doesn't start there. It's Samuel Zavala a couple of years ago, is that 2021 class, I believe. And they got some kids that they didn't spend a whole lot of money on. Iriarte, the right-hander who's getting close to the big leagues. I think he cost them $300,000. So it's not just the low hanging fruit, because some of these top guys are generally easy, right? There's not a whole lot of skill. Getting Ethan Salas wasn't like a whole lot of scouting skill, right, Joe? Because I think that's the thing that maybe there's some disconnect, that, like, how did the Padres unearth Ethan Salas and the New York Yankees couldn't? That's not really the way it works, right?
No, I mean, and this is a topic that's been discussed ad nauseum, whether good or bad. Like, a lot of times, landing an international prospect has to do with like three things. One, does the player know who your organization is? Does he like the players that have come through your organization? Does he like the city and the weather? Is he just generally intrigued by playing for that organization? The San Diego Padres, I've been to San Diego a few times. I like San Diego quite a bit, and I would love to live there.
Most overrated
So,
city in America. Come on, man.
but
Come on,
but
man.
like, if
Oh
so,
yeah, you
but
get the
look at it this
sun,
way.
you get the Padres, you get the uniforms, you get the, there's some recent
Sounds
success there.
awful.
There's some guys that came, Fernando Tatis Jr., Manny Machado. I get it. Absolutely. If you're a
But
15,
that's
16-year-old
point right
kid, that's
there.
what you're looking for. Absolutely.
That's the point right there. Like, if 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, let's say Ethan Salas was 14 years old, and as we know, I said this on my podcast, Jason, and I'll say it on this podcast. You can be mad at me all you want for reporting these deals 18 months prior to them actually happening, because technically these deals can't exist. Handshake deals exist. Get over it. I'm reporting on them. I don't care. I don't report on the bonuses because I think it puts some of these kids and families in a place that they shouldn't be at a young age, but I'm going to report on the deals. Don't care. But if you're a 14-year-old Ethan Salas or a 15-year-old Leo Dallas DeVries, and you see Fernando Tatis and all that flair and all that fun and all that personality and Manny Machado, you see those guys doing their thing in San Diego. Pretty dang hard not to be interested in playing in that market, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing that we heard about Julio Rodriguez. Like, Julio Rodriguez loved watching film of Alex Rodriguez and Ken Griffey Jr. and Felix Hernandez. Those are the sorts of things that draw these, essentially, for lack of a better word, kids toward signing with these teams. Now, ultimately, it really just comes down to the academy that they're training at, having relationships with teams that have been built up over years and years and years and years and years. And the academies, I don't want to say brokering deals with the organizations by way of the player, but that's
You
kind
could
of what
probably
happens.
say they broker the relationship between.
You could say, and they take a cut, and they take a cut. But the key is, like, does the kid like your organization? Is he drawn towards your organization? And do you have a good relationship as the academy with that team? And that's why the same teams win in international scouting and over, because they have long standing relationships with these academies, and communication lines are open. And, that's why you see the Dodgers and the Padres and the Mets and the Braves and the Yankees winning at the top over and over, because they've been there, they've done that, and they're not having to start from the ground up.
And
It's
so
a long process.
the whole idea isn't different domestically either in the draft. The only difference there is that team may not get the opportunity to draft that player, but the same stuff happens. Coaches, whether it be all the way from travel ball or the showcase circuit, those people have relationships with scouts and front office folks that are like, hey, this kid is for real. He's a great kid. He's a great student. You should see him work. And all of a sudden that team's on that player when they otherwise might not be. It's because of those relationships. Interesting. So you mentioned the top guy. How far in a way better is he than, like Perdomo or Santana or Cruz or Sanchez, kind of that next group of guys? Is he far and away, is DeVries the far and away the number one guy?
I think he's far and away the number one prospect, just in terms of the ceiling. I for me, my number two prospect was Emil Morales, who went to the Dodgers, and he's a full grade better in terms of like the future role and projection in terms of what he could be than Emil Morales. But yeah, I mean, I don't look at anybody else on this international scene. I don't look at Perdomo. I don't look at Fernando Cruz. I don't look at, Adolfo Sanchez or Paulino Santana. I don't look at any of those guys with superstar in my eyes.
Mhm.
Leo Dallas DeVries could be a superstar if he hits,
And
and
he's got
that's the key with all these guys. Like,
an
can they hit
absolute
95?
80 grade first name, by the way.
Oh yeah,
Leo Dallas. It's like Odalis, like Odalis Perez, but with Leo at the beginning of it. I mean, we got to get that on television, man.
his
Like,
name is
so
so cool that they took his last name and they split it in half.
in
That's
case you're
pretty
wondering
cool.
how that rolls, it's DeVries, capital DE space capital VRIES.
Yeah,
DeVries. Yeah.
Leo
It
Dallas
is beautiful.
of Vries.
What is Vries in Spanish? Do we know?
I think it's fries, and fries are good.
Oh, that is incredible. That might be the greatest name. That's the greatest name in sports history. Are you kidding me? What's he about? 6'2", 185, something like that.
Yeah,
Switch hitter, got a legit chance to switch it. I mean, I know he's 17, but that's the
I would
idea.
just make him I would just make him hit left-handed. It's so much
Yeah,
better left-handed.
yeah.
But
Hit, power,
he's
run,
17.
everything's average or better.
Oh, it's a 6 glove, it's a 6 run, it's 6 raw power. I'm not gonna. I think it's kind of a futile exercise for any website to put a hit tool on some of these guys. Like, you're just really basing it off of the swing. They're,
Yeah, which is
like,
really
these
hard
guys
to do.
haven't seen anything. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. But like, it's 6 run, it's 6 raw, it's 55 arm, it's 6 glove. Like, it's so good.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think the conversation really should be not how he stacks up against everyone in this class, but how he stacks up against Felny and Celestin from
Mhm.
2023.
Well.
I like DeVries. I like DeVries' swing more than I like Celestin's swing.
Mhm.
I like Celestin's actions a touch more at the shortstop position, and I think the frame is a little bit better with Celestin to actually play the
Mhm.
shortstop position. Um, but man, I genuinely think it's a toss up. And if you were to give me the opportunity to take one right now,
Mhm.
I think I would take DeVries because I think the swing will adapt to premium stuff a little bit quicker.
And for those of you unaware, Felny Celestin was the shortstop the Mariners signed in last year's class. He was the top shortstop, but generally the second overall player with Solace being the clear number one in last year's class. That's interesting. So I think something that's interesting is like you have to take these shots just like in the draft. I mean, these are shots that cost you $100,000, $500,000, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million. These are easy shots to take. If you're a club, you go take these shots just like you would, the top, 10 rounds in the draft. But when you look back, you go back to, 2016 for example, because it's 8 years. That's plenty of time. You go back to 2016, the international class. That was the year that Luis Robert Jr. was the dude. That was 8 years ago. He was 18 years old. He was the number one guy. Do you remember who the number two guy in that class was, Joe?
Was 16 Puason?
No.
Was that
But
15 maybe?
that's also a good example.
Who was 2 that year?
Yeah, it was a shortstop. I'm giving you hints here. You're going to run into it. But the point I'm trying to make, and this was the year with Ruiz and Perez, and Vladimir Gutierrez and Lourdes Gurriel Jr.
Gutierrez.
And Lourdes Gurriel Jr. was the older international free agent that was ready to hit, ready to get to the big leagues essentially. The point I'm trying to make here is like you can look back on some of these years. 2018, the number one guy was Victor Mesa.
Was it Kevin Maitan? Or no, I think he was.
Yeah.
It was Kevin
Maitan.
Maitan.
Exactly. Yep. He was the number two guy, and it hasn't worked. And so the attrition of when you're looking at rankings, it doesn't matter whose rankings you're looking at, but when you're looking at rankings, the attrition rate in international free agency like this is pretty significant. And you can see why. These kids are scouted at 13, 14, 15 years old. Agreements are made before they're 16. A lot's going to change. They're going to change physically. They're going to change mentally. They're going to change emotionally. You just never know how this is going to happen. And the difference between this and the draft is we are asking these kids to come from Venezuela and the Dominican Republic and other places in South America and Central America and sometimes Cuba. And they're coming to the United States where their first language is not English, and we're asking them to thrive. And it's hard, man. Like, I can't imagine at my age trying to do that. So I'm not trying to bury these kids, but it does seem like, Joe, and I'm hoping you can shed more light on this. It does seem like more and more the last 4, 5, 6, 10 years, teams are trying to design environments, developmental environments that include culture, and trying to really help these kids along instead of, well, you're in Florida now, like, be a big leaguer. Cause that's kind of what used to happen, man. Like, it's like,
I'm so
here
glad
you
you brought
go.
that
And it's
up.
like, hello, this is a 16-year-old kid that you just gave $2 million to, who's left his family for the first time. He's thousands of miles away, and he's just supposed to navigate this. Like, teams are getting better at that, right?
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways this entire process, the hit rate has improved. Like, for one, and I know this isn't on the like on the culture side, but since like 2018, scouting directors and cross checkers internationally have been able to take mobile TrackMan units to these academies and actually get like measurable readings on what these players' bat speed is and exit velos is, and they know what sort of a player they have with the bat, or at least what they're capable of. And I think that goes at least into it a little bit. But like, I look at some of the best organizations. Like, we talked about the Braves and the Yankees and the Dodgers. A lot of these organizations just require that the players stay in the Dominican Summer League or overseas, regardless of if they're hitting 600 with 10 home runs. For the most part, they require they stay there, get assimilated to professional baseball, get assimilated with their new teammates, and more importantly than anything, go through life coaching and go through English lessons. They take English if they don't know how to speak English. It's a requirement. And they still go to school in a lot of cases. So I think that's a really big part of this. Like, you can't just trust a 17-year-old who in a lot of cases has only ever been exposed to the chains and the cars and the houses and the women that come with Major League Baseball, and not expect them to just go cook all of their money on that right away and forget about what their responsibilities are as a kid, as a player, as a professional. So I think organizations are taking it a little bit slower with most of the players that they can. Now, I'll say the immediate guy that comes up, everybody will bring this up. Ethan Salas was in AAA at 17. Ethan Salas speaks fluent English. He trained in Florida for much of his life. He is, in a lot of ways, a more domestic prospect than he was an international prospect.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, he was born in Florida, for crying out loud.
Yeah, he trained in Orlando since he was like 12. I mean, Ethan Salas was literally seeing 97-mile-an-hour heaters as a 14-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, his brother came through pro
very
ball
much
as well,
an outlier. Yeah, but to your point, teams are spending more money on the bare essentials, like just feeding these guys like they need to be fed, and coaching and financial advice, and English lessons and schooling. Like, I think that's critical whenever you kind of uproot a kid at the age of 17 into a profession, which can't be understated.
And when those kids that are from and have lived their whole lives in Venezuela or Dominican, I think Julio Rodriguez is a great example. It's remarkable what Julio Rodriguez did. He gets signed. He does his thing. He performed. I remember seeing him in 2018. He was in Class A West Virginia as an 18-year-old. And he was different from the start, and not even really like in terms of like tools and performance. He was so comfortable there, and it's because he could communicate with anybody. And that is such a big thing, being able to, you feel like you're not lost. You're not nervous about anything. You're going to be able to help yourself. But he just truly loved being there, and he was able to relax. So good on the Mariners. But in that case, it really seems like Julio and his family did a lot of work to prepare him for something like this, and it's gone a long ways. And it's like we look at Julio Rodriguez as he's a great Major League Baseball player, but and sure, he has an accent. He's 23 years old or whatever. He's been in the big leagues 2 years. He's been in the States 5 years, but he speaks fluent English.
Mm-hmm.
And has for a long time. And when you see kids do that, it's really, really impressive. And we're seeing that more. And I think because we've talked about it, and I talked about last week on the show, the idea of international free agency, it's not a perfect, transactional period. And I've talked about maybe it probably should be some kind of draft instead, but it's getting better. Like Major League Baseball is spending resources and energy into it. Now, granted, they're doing it for their own good, but it's
Yeah.
also good for the kids, right? Because I think there's and I think there's this this belief out there that it's this, like, the whole process is this really kind of sleazy um take advantage of these 14, 15-year-old kids and their families kind of a situation. And I don't know that that's fair. And I don't think, yeah, and I think you agree with me that that's really unfair at this point. I think a lot of that junk has been cleaned up over the last, 10 to 20 years. And this is a much more upfront, kind of above the ground sort of process where these kids and their families are treated a lot better than, because everybody heard about this. Scouts were basically stealing money from the players and
Yeah.
all kinds of lies and garbage. And like that has been cleaned up, and the league and the clubs involved are a big part of that. Are they not?
Yeah, I think you laid it out great. I think a lot of things have really, really improved over the last even 3 to 5 years. And for those of you listening or watching that don't know how this entire system works, and there are outliers, there are exceptions, there are always going to be under table dealings that make the system look terrible. But long story short, trainer, agent, whatever you want to call him, finds a kid in the middle of nowhere, spends 6 months with that kid figuring out if he's a real deal athlete, right? They then take that kid, depending on that kid's level of talent, and will essentially sell his rights to an academy for, let's say, $50,000. Now, when I say sell his rights, what they're actually doing is affording that player the ability to train at an academy where he will be seen by every single organization. And then the I guess the nasty part of it is the academy will then sign a deal with the player that says, "Hey, we are going to take 30% or whatever. It could be much lower, it could be much higher of your signing bonus when you sign with a team." So, a broker to the academy for $50,000. Let's say the academy then gets that player a deal for $400,000 with the Orioles. The player ends up taking 260 of it. The
Mhm.
academy takes 140 of it. But my whole thing is, like, what other opportunity would that person or player have had to earn $250,000
Yeah.
playing baseball in front of scouts? Like, that's such an enormously opportunistic opportunity that I think
Mhm.
gets left behind. And what we talked about 5 minutes ago is the important part. I think a lot of people see this system as, okay, teams pay $10,000 for a player. That player never makes it out of the DSL. They crap out and they're just left behind in the world. Well, they're not. I mean, that player made $7,000 in that training or in that
Mhm.
signing, but also in those years they got free food at the academy in some cases. They got English lessons, they got free schooling. They trained there for years.
Mhm.
And a lot of times those academies provide better educational opportunities, and not only that, but nutritional opportunities than they would have received otherwise in a small town. So
Yeah.
yeah, like at the end of the
So
day,
it's
when you
it's not
look at it,
perfect.
it's
It's not
not
perfect,
perfect.
is what you're saying, but it's
And do
it's
you think,
significantly better, and it is above board
is it
grossing, right?
nasty? Is
Yeah.
it nasty that, and maybe nasty isn't the word, is it ethical that an academy signs up a 13-year-old and his
Mhm.
family to, in a few years, take 30% of a signing bonus? It's a heavy number. It's a very
Yes.
big number.
Yes.
Would that player have gotten even 20% of that deal had they trained at home and played in men's baseball leagues? No.
No.
Like they just wouldn't have been seen by enough teams to have the leverage to negotiate a deal. Nor would they have the relationships with the academy to broker the idea, because the academies have the relationships with the teams, and the teams trust the academies to place a dollar figure value on that player. So is it a enormous capitalistic operation mechanism?
Yeah.
Yes, but so is Major League Baseball, and it's kind of what affords so many of these
Yeah.
kids, these teenagers, the opportunities to make money that they've never would have made.
So I'm going to ask you some questions that a lot of us already know the answers to, but I think they're important. Is there a cap? I'm not talking about the bonus pool for the teams. Is there a cap on how much a player can be paid in international free agency?
No.
Okay. So there's an advantage there. There's no cap. Like if a team happens to have $25 million in their bonus pool, they could give that all to one player. That can't happen in the Major League Baseball draft. I mean, technically, could a team give their entire? Yes, but we know it'll never happen. We know it would never ever happen. If a team saw a special kid in international free agents, they're only signing 5 to 10 kids. They could decide, you know what? Let's give this kid our entire $8 million bonus pool, and we'll just work off of that. In the draft, there are 20 rounds. It's slotted. There's a lot of stuff that would happen. Like the league and the other teams would frown on a club saying, hey, you have $8 million in your draft pool, and you're going to spend all of it on your first round guy, and you're just going to sign a bunch of $20,000, college kids after. It would just never happen.
Yeah.
I could see that happening at the international level. If there was a special kid and a team like the Twins or something got a special, unique opportunity, you could see that. So I like that there's no actual cap on the international from a player standpoint, because even though it's not necessarily a rule domestically here with the draft, there kind of is. So it's kind of an advantage that they have over the domestic kids.
To your point about, and maybe this is a good segue, does an international draft make sense? I think it does. I think all of the mechanisms that are currently in place, the broker to the academy to Major League Baseball, I think all of that can still exist. I think trainers and I think the entire ecosystem of how that works internationally could still make the same amounts of money. I kind of think, I go back and forth on this. On one hand, I look at it like, by not having a draft, you are giving this 14, 15-year-old and their family an iota of power by telling them where they want to sign, which is more than guys in the amateur baseball draft have.
Right.
But on the other side of it, part of me is like, well, these 15-year-olds, they have no idea what they're doing. They don't really know anything about the organization that they're signing with outside of, I really like Fernando Tatis Jr. So
Right.
I think in both cases it could work, but I do tend to veer toward, let's not have an amateur draft, even though the talent discrepancy between the top teams and the bottom teams is pretty vast right now because of the relationships that have been built. It does give the families and the player at least one opportunity to choose where they're going to play, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. The biggest reason I want an international draft for those kids down there. The biggest, there are lots of reasons. I went over that last week, but the biggest reason is, for me, like think about Perdomo, for example. Like think about him. Like maybe they think it's better to go to, like the Yankees or the Mets or the Red Sox or whatever it is. But is that really better for the player? Like they're never going to know that. Like they may have a choice, and you were hitting on this a second ago. They may love the idea, Leo Dallas may love the idea going to the Padres, but that, he probably has no idea whether that's the best place for him to be.
Agreed.
You know what I'm saying? And not that the draft fixes that, but what the draft will do is, like, if you were to get drafted by, I don't know, who had the worst record in baseball last year? The A's?
Oakland, maybe?
If you were getting drafted by the A's, I'm not saying that would be a good thing from a developmental standpoint. I'm not saying that, because I don't know that it is really. Right now, I'd say probably not. But the chances that you're drafted by someone who's going to give you opportunities and you're not going to get traded a bunch are those teams that draft at the top. Like, think about how seldom the Pirates trade prospects. You know what I'm saying? And how often the Reds trade prospects and the A's trade prospects. They're usually the team trying to get prospects. So you're more likely to stay with that team as well. And I believe it was 2015. There was a study, and I think Major League Baseball partially commissioned the study. Players that stay with the same team until they reach the big leagues have more success. That's not
Totally believe
exact
it.
science, but have more success. If you bounce around before you get to the big league, you're 17, 18, 19, 20 years old and you get traded once, twice, 3 times, like that's not good for development. So I don't know. I just think like maybe there's some advantages there as well. But it does kind of disperse the talent more evenly in Major League Baseball too. But I'm with you. I'm certainly not going to whine about the fact that these players and their families have a little bit of a choice here.
Yeah.
There is
One
value
other
to that,
thing,
and I like that.
one other thing that I think is beneficial to the player, at least in this situation, is if you are a superstar 14, 15-year-old, usually I think they're usually 14.
Mhm.
If you're let's actually use Jose Perdomo as an example. And you can even throw Brandon Maia from 2023 into this. Brandon Maia got $5 million in 2023. Jose Perdomo was the number 1 paid player in this past class. I'm trying to remember what I think he got 5.5, 5.6.
Mhm.
I can tell you that in speaking with scouting directors now, Perdomo wouldn't have gone in the top 3 in a international draft, and Maia wouldn't have gone in the top 8 in an international draft in 2023.
Mhm.
That being said, they both negotiated years prior bonuses that are not reflective of where their actual upside was in their class. So, outside of their remaining handshake deals where the New York Yankees picked 24th in this international draft and they're still going to pay Brandon Maia $5 million and try
Yeah.
and figure out the money situation later. Outside of that happening, which I don't think would have any chance because you would burn bridges by having to cut other players that you have deals with. It gives power to the players by even if they regress, they still have these deals on the table. It takes power away from the teams from being able to walk away from these deals if they feel they've been soured.
I think with a draft, though, you don't have those deals. I think that's what would happen. You just wouldn't have those deals. There would
But
be a
that's my
tighter.
that's my
It
point.
would be a tighter
That's my
evaluation.
point is
But somebody would get that money though. It's not that the money would go away. It's just that the money, instead of Perdomo getting that or whoever, it would be the player that team decided to actually take at 24. That player would be getting that money. You know what I'm saying? Because
yeah,
I would imagine if they
that's
ever
true.
did an international draft, it would be basically just like the domestic draft, the Rule 4 draft, where there's slots and slot values and stuff like that. I would just imagine it would go. So somebody would still get it. You know, so I just don't think that those early negotiations would really just take place anymore. There'd be no need for it. It'd be like, well, we don't know we're going to get you. We don't
Well,
know if we're going
I
to get a
think
chance because the Red Sox might take you at 17 and we pick at 22. So I don't know. There'd be no way, and there's no
I think
way to
my point
project
would
out
be
2-3 years.
the top players that have these deals years in advance, the Fernando Cruz, the Maias, the Perdomos,
Mhm.
that slip a few spots in international rankings for upside. Like Leo Dallas DeVries came on late. He really burst onto the scene after he hit a growth spurt about 16 months ago, 18 months ago. And his
Mhm.
bonus number grew actually because the Padres realized, oh man, we got a real dude here. So I'm just saying like the guys that it would hurt would be the guys that probably peak at 14 or 15, which might not be bad
Yeah.
for the game, but it is ultimately bad for those specific players in that moment.
But it would be better for players that are now going to get
It
that
would be
money that
better.
otherwise
It
wouldn't. And those
it would
players
be
would be the
better.
players that, for the most part, would deserve it. Right. The better
Yeah,
players
yeah. I
should
mean,
get the most money.
look at Emil Morales. I mean, yeah, two sides of the coin. Morales got probably, I'm not going to put a dollar value on it, but he would have gotten way more had there been a draft. So yeah,
Yeah.
it helps some and it hurts some.
Yeah, I have no problem with the players getting paid per how the teams see their value in a draft, just like a draft. Like, I have no issue with that. I'm not trying to take money out of anybody's pocket, any specific person's pocket. But if you're getting paid based on how that profession as a whole kind of sees your future, I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, that's how it
Yeah.
works everywhere
Jason
else. In
Churchill,
baseball.
free market stan.
I mean, the draft isn't exactly free market, but I do
No,
think it would be. I do think it would
but
be
there's
better for
yeah.
Major League Baseball. I'm not 100% sure it's better for the kid, but I think it would be better for Major League Baseball if there were a draft. And I do think there's some benefits to the kid for that too. Anyway, so
Yeah.
getting back to this year's class, before we move on and talk Josh Hader, the we talked about some of the top names. We talked about the top name, and it seems like he's pretty clearly the number one guy. Um, are there clubs out there, there maybe two or three, give us two or three who had really strong classes, including one that may not be getting the attention you think it deserves at this point? And granted, like, these kids are 16, 17 years old. It's really, really early in the process. So the information is, certainly limited. But if you're having to come to some level of conclusion today, who are the two or three best signing classes, including a sneaky good one you like?
Well, I think the Dodgers, and I'm going to say the Dodgers, even though it feels like a bit of a cop out. Emil Morales on public boards is ranked way too low. And it's
Mhm.
one thing that is not totally understood on social media from baseball fans and prospect fans is, MLB Pipeline. And this is not I'm not bashing these publications. MLB Pipeline and Baseball America, for the better part of leading up to International Signing Day, do not rank players based on skill and upside. They rank them based on bonus, like
Right.
who's going to get the biggest bonus, and then they go, 1 to 100 or whatever. So that
Mhm.
isn't indicative of who the best players are. So you're going to see Emil Morales in the 10 to 15 range for the Dodgers all over the place.
Mhm.
But I think he was the second best prospect in this class. So and they got him for a good deal. So I'd say the Dodgers did very, very well here, and we're going to look back and look back at Julio Rodriguez. Julio Rodriguez was like 8 to 10
Yeah.
back in
Novin Marte
2017.
as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and both of those guys ended up being the best players, arguably, from their classes.
Mhm.
So the Dodgers crushed it. I think the Texas Rangers had a really good class, and this is coming on the heels of a year when they landed Sebastian Wolcott, who had a meteoric rise leading up to their International Signing Day. I love Paulino Santana. I think he's a top 10 player in this class. I've had directors tell me he's a top 5 player in this class.
Mhm.
He can switch hit. He can really run. He's got really fast hands, good body, power from the left side. Like, I think he's going to be a stud. I think he's going to be one of the better players from this class. And also, I really like Yolfran Castillo out of Venezuela for the Rangers. I think he's got a chance to stick at shortstop and maybe add a little bit of power. The team that I think had a really sneaky International Signing Day is actually the Angels, which is, I think that says a lot because the Angels are a team that is kind of criticized quite a bit. Joshua Lugo is a monster at 6'3", 185. He might end up at third base. There's a lot of Noelvi Marte in the entire package. Tons of right-handed power. It's a simple swing with a ton of bat speed.
But
He's one of my favorite players from
this
this
is a
class.
really big kid, right? This is a kid
He's
who's already
huge
like
at
6'3"
17.
and 6'3" and 190, and yeah, and he's just turning
Yeah.
17 this month. Yeah.
But you could make the argument that he's a right fielder too. Like it's plus arm strength,
Sure.
it's plus speed right now, it's plus raw power, maybe more.
Mhm.
Um, and
Yeah,
he's got
and while
bloodlines
that's a
too.
thing, I think we all understand why you said that, because getting that at shortstop is a lot different than getting that in right field. But to counter that, I think you'd agree with this. If I told you Julio Rodriguez was a right fielder right now, he'd still be the best guy in that class, right? Because he's hitting.
Yeah, but the thing is, like Julio Rodriguez, when he signed in 2017, was already a right fielder. And credit
Sure.
to Julio Rodriguez, he's actually done what nobody does, which is move inside the middle of the field.
Right.
So which is crazy considering he was like 6'3". I think that's about how big he was when he signed, 6'3", 185.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds about right. And
But
now he's
anyway,
225 and staying in center somehow. But yeah, so
yeah,
that doesn't necessarily mean that like Lugo can't be a star of some sort. It just means that there's a little more pressure on him to hit big is all.
yeah,
Because I think some people take that, yeah, but he can't play shortstop. Well, I mean, not that
it
you
doesn't
said
matter.
that. You didn't say that either, but you said this might be a guy who ends up having to go to right field because he is big. And I think that's the thing that stands out most about Lugo when you just look at his basic profile. Guy that's basically 190 pounds already at 16 years
Yeah.
old. You don't see that a whole lot.
No, and if you can ever buy a bat at this age and you think it has any chance of staying on the dirt,
Mhm.
you buy it. Like
Yeah.
if this is Noel V. Marte, you got a really good player. But I do want to add, I Hayden Alvarez is an outfielder from the Dominican Republic who I had in my top 30. Again, another 6'2" really good glove, and a guy that was a better performer in the in-game and tournament circuits than a lot of his peers. Like the guy just hit arms. Like
Mhm.
he may not have the physical tools at the plate yet of some of his contemporaries in this class, um, but he performed and he can play center field. So I don't know, and I like the Angels because those two guys really stand out, and it's cheating a little bit, but they have a bat in 2025 that's coming that looks like um oh god, I can't even remember his name. The Royals catcher. Uh what's his name? Jason, what's going on with my brain?
Who are you talking about? Which
The Royals catcher. Who's
I'm
the
trying to
Royals starting catcher from the last 15 years?
Salvador Perez?
Yeah, he
That's
looks
the guy you couldn't think of?
dude, I couldn't think of the Hall of Fame catcher.
That's why
The
I was
kid
so
in
puzzled. I was like, you can't be
2025
talking about Salvi.
the kid in 2025 looks like Salvador Perez, and
Okay.
I'm just really looking forward to him being in pro ball, which I understand is 18 months away, but I think the
Mhm.
Angels are doing some really good things right now in international scouting.
Which guy is that?
His name is Gabriel Davalillo.
Okay.
I tweeted about him last week, and for a kid that has the strength and thickness in his lower half, I always am kind of weird about talking about the frame of a kid that's 16, but that's
Sure.
part of the
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
The kid has strength and thickness in his lower half, and it's distributed pretty well, but he still has some of the twitchiest hips I've seen for a kid that age and that size that just make, and that's kind of what
This is going on
that's
the
kind
internet. This is going on the internet, dude.
that's kind of what Salvi does, right? Like the guy Salvi moves offensively at the plate so well for a guy that has like 180 pounds below the belt.
So
And I just
are you saying
it's
that despite the fact
I'm
that he's like
just
35 years
saying.
old, Salvador Perez has super twitchy hips?
No, but I'm saying you would never expect a guy to move like Salvi moves
Sure.
at his size with the tread on his tires. Like
Yeah.
I don't know, Davalillo looks very exciting from an
See,
offensive perspective.
so the Angels had a sneaky good sign. They signed a lot of guys. Did they sign the most guys? I think it was 15 players deep.
I don't know.
That's a lot of guys. You don't see that
I
a
don't
whole
know.
lot. Usually you see teams they get to 8, 10, 11, at least this early in the process because there
Yeah.
are kids. I mean, the limit is the minimum requirement is still 16 years of age. So there are some kids that are turning 16, coming up that will that may sign. You get some scragglers like that, but for the most part,
Yeah.
these kids are 16 and closer to 17, if not already 17 years old. That's a lot of guys in that Angels class, 15 players. Good stuff there. The international free agent period. I do miss it being in July, Joe,
I don't,
but
because I think
but
you get a
I
full DSL season now.
I miss it. Yeah, I do miss the just as far as the announcement goes because we're getting close to the All-Star break. We're too far away from the trade deadline. I like that little like 3-day news cycle of the international. But like I talked about last week, if you turn this into an event, if you make a draft out of this and you turn it into to an event and you do it the week or 2 weeks after the Super Bowl as spring camps are opening up, you kind of tie it together with spring training as the kickoff to the 2024 Major League Baseball season. And I think you have yourselves a little mini marketing opportunity if you're Major League Baseball as well. So I don't know. We'll see what they do with international amateur free agents. Anyway, all right, Josh Hader has a new home, and it only took Joe 5 years and $95 million to get him there, and he has landed in Houston with the defending American League West champion, 2-time world champion over the last 7 years, the Houston Astros.
Yeah.
Initial thoughts on 5 and 95 for a reliever who's going to be 30 in April, coming off, I will say, probably his worst season, the worst season of his major league career. Even though a lot of people will look at that ERA of under 1.3 and say, Churchill, what the hell are you talking about? There are a lot of signs here that, like, this isn't necessarily, he's still good, but this isn't necessarily the most dominant version of Josh Hader moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's about $15 million richer than I was expecting. I texted about this last week. I was expecting 5 and 80, maybe 5 and 75 for a team to go to that 5th year on a reliever in the first place. I thought 4 and 65 or 5 and 75 was going to be, with 5 and 80 as kind of the peak. So 5 and 95 is a little rich. Now he is only 29. He's going to pitch 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34. There have been much worse contracts doled out for relievers in the last 5 years.
One of them on
think
the Astros.
Yeah, the
we'll talk about that in a
deal
second.
isn't great. I think it says a couple of things. So one, do I think he's in decline? I think he got absolutely shelled for a few weeks there, and that kind of ballooned his numbers a little bit, including his batted ball metrics and his expected run values. For the most part, I think he was a dominant reliever for 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that being said, I do think, first of all, find me a long reliever deal that has worked out. They don't exist.
You'd probably have to quantify worked out, because I think, but you're right, Joe. You'd have to define it differently with the reliever, because you kind of know they're not going to work out. If you're giving a guy 4 or 5 years to pitch in your bullpen, it's not going to work out the way that a starting pitcher contract would, or a first base contract would, or a third base contract would. That's just kind of the nature of it. Getting back to Hader's potential decline, draw your own conclusions. But I look at, despite the fact that the ERA was amazing, he a career worst 13% walk rate, his second lowest strikeout rate of his career, and almost 10% lower than it was in 2021. The lowest swinging strike rate of his career, the lowest home run per fly ball rate of his career, which is probably not sustainable. And he does bounce around there quite a bit. He's had 3 seasons in his career where it was under 10%, but he's had 3 seasons in his career where it was over 15%. So which version of Josh Hader are you going to get when it comes to the home run in that ballpark, particularly against righties? And he's a lefty in that ballpark, in the juice box, as I like to call it. I think there are signs of decline. It's not like I think he's going to completely fall off the table. We're still talking about a guy who, throws 95 miles an hour. Yeah, he's still 95 and will touch 98, 99 and has 2 other pitches, and doesn't throw his changeup a whole lot. It's mostly fastball slider, but still misses a lot of bats and all that good stuff. So a couple of things that are interesting to me about the signing. The first thing I think of is, I think the Astros probably wanted to sign a starter and couldn't get anybody on a number they liked, so they spent this money on a reliever. Because I think we both like Ryan Pressly quite a bit. I like Brian Abreu plenty as the 3rd best guy in that pen. So did they need Josh Hader? No. Does he make them better? He absolutely does. But Joe, the Astros are now paying in 2024, assuming Hader's 2024 paycheck is going to be essentially the AAV, almost $20 million a year. They're going to be paying 3 guys over $45 million. That's Rafael Montero at 11.5, Ryan Pressly at 14, and Hader nearly $20 million in 2024. That is more money than most teams, almost all teams, will spend on their entire bullpen. And they've doled that out to 3 guys.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a no trade clause, because it screams a type of deal where Hader is moved in 2026 in July.
Mm-hmm.
It just screams like, hey, he's having a pretty good year. Bregman has fallen off. Altuve has fallen off. Verlander is gone. The
Yeah.
Astros are trying to stay relevant. They're having a bad year. It screams to me a deal where Hader spends 2.5 years in Houston. But what it also tells me is I think Houston understands that it's an aging roster. It's a poor farm system.
Yeah.
The window is closing. Why don't we go get one of the most elite electric relievers we can to try and push this thing open for another 2 years? Because before they signed Hader, I looked at Houston as like a 92 win team, like definitely a team that is probably going to be a favorite and compete for the AL West crown.
Sure.
Now it's probably a 95 win team
Mhm.
with a lot of options at the back of their bullpen. So,
I think one thing
um,
this does also, Joe, is like Hunter Brown. He had a good year last year, but the thoughts on Hunter Brown have been okay. He can start. He's not necessarily great. Sometimes he looks great. Maybe this is a guy who belongs in the bullpen. I think this ends all discussion about Hunter
he's a
Brown for
starter.
2024. That guy's in their starting rotation. So they do have Verlander coming back, however good he is at 400 years old. Framber Valdez, one of the best left-handers in baseball. Christian Javier is a great mid-rotation guy. And then it falls off a little bit from there unless Hunter Brown steps in and takes another step forward. So I think that's some indirect value that signing a guy like Hader allows the Astros to do, is just complete. And they could have made that choice anyway, but now they're at least
Yeah.
covered in the bullpen and won't necessarily be enticed to do that. I just, whether it's Jose Urquidy or Lance McCullers Jr. or Luis Garcia at the back end with, or JP France at the back end um, with Hunter Brown, but it looks like, you got a pretty good top four there with Verlander, Valdez, Javier, and Hunter Brown. And maybe that was part of the conversation as well in signing a guy like Hader.
Here's a question for you. Because I haven't looked it up, does this push the Astros over the CBT?
I don't believe
Over
it
the luxury
does.
tax?
I don't believe it
Okay.
does, but I will look that up
I
as we're
don't think it does
talking.
either. I don't think it does either. And all we've heard, especially with the TV situation going on, is that Jim Crane will not go over the luxury tax. So my
Yeah.
question for you is
By the way, what's the tax number? Do you know what it is?
237.
Then they're over.
They are over.
Yeah. They're over for 24.
Interesting.
Yeah. By
Interesting.
barely. So it's not
Okay,
a
well, you
big,
only have to pay a tax on the overage.
right. It's just
But
they're over by like $5 million, something like that.
I mean, they might be able to find a way to shave that.
Yeah.
But my question for you is, this has to play a part in whether Alex Bregman and Jose Altuve are going to be long for Houston. I'm sure one returns,
Mhm.
but I have a hard time seeing both of those guys fit into the budget for the future.
I'm not sure why Houston would want to sign Alex Bregman to a long-term deal. I'm not sure why you'd want to do
it's
that.
not
I
the
mean,
type of player that would age well, and he's already making a ton of money. He's probably not going to take a pay cut from Houston.
yeah, what is it, 25? Yeah.
Yeah,
But what's he going to get in free agency? Like, he's making $20 million
not
a
that.
year average on his current deal that ends at the end of the season. And he's 29 years old. He's going to be 30 in March, basically as the season starts. And while he's a good player, he was a 5.5 win player last year. He was at this past season, he was over a 4-win player. There's a little bit of injury history in there, nothing significant. But what is he from age 30 moving forward? I mean, maybe the Matt Chapman deal will tell us a lot about the possibility for Alex Bregman, and we don't know what the Matt Chapman result is going to be. But if you're Houston, I don't think you can keep Bregman. I mean, you have Kyle Tucker and Framber Valdez to worry about long term. You have not inked those guys to long term deals. You're basically paying both those guys $12 million in arbitration this year. You're not going to let those guys walk, right? And it might come down to, considering where they are payroll wise, it might come down to, are we keeping Alex Bregman or are we keeping Framber Valdez? Or are we keeping Alex Bregman or are we keeping Kyle Tucker? And you have to think they're going to favor the two younger players.
Without question. You know, the worst thing to happen to Alex Bregman is DJ LeMahieu. Like, he is such a telltale sign for a guy that
both LSU guys
got
too. Both LSU shortstops. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I didn't even think of that angle. But no, I mean, you look at what LeMahieu did in his only year with New York before signing a massive extension was he took advantage of a short porch.
Mm-hmm.
He lived on bat to ball skills. He was able to move around the diamond. And I think you could make the case, while Bregman is at least 3 inches shorter than LeMahieu. I think LeMahieu's like 6'5". He's huge.
He's a big guy. I think he's listed at
He's
6'4" at least. So he's
yeah,
got
he's
4 inches on
enormous.
Bregman. Yeah, and Bregman might only be 5'11" too. So you're right.
Yeah, so LeMahieu in that 1 year with New York was like a 5.5 win player, 5.7 win player.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're looking at with Bregman right now on the cusp of needing to be signed somewhere. I just, without the Crawford boxes, with his body aging, and he's had some chronic injuries over the years that have been soft tissue. I just feel like Alex Bregman is going to settle into being a 2.5 win player sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
It's what
I can see that.
LeMahieu had.
And
What
that's
happened
kind of
with
what,
LeMahieu.
he was in 2020 and 2021. Although 2020 was a shortened season, in 2021 he only played 91 games. But that's the kind of value you might get at some point moving forward. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I really do think the Matt Chapman deal might tell us what the market thinks about players of that ilk. Chapman being less of a hitter than Bregman is, I think, a little bit, and more of a defender. Although both players can do a little bit of both. But I think that market's going to tell us a lot, not just in the number, but in how aggressive the number is in general, suggesting how teams are valuing that kind of a player at this point. The 29, 30-year-old third baseman that's clearly not on the upside of his career. I don't want to say downside as if they only have a year left. We'll see. Every year, I think Bregman's going to completely fall off the table. He goes out and hits 260, 360 with 25 homers. But you made a good point. Without the Crawford boxes, what does that look like? Because we're talking about a guy who from a power standpoint, like you can't see those numbers. They don't struggle away from home. You look at last year, he was better on the road, power wise and average wise, but those Crawford boxes do help him.
But not the exit velo numbers.
Right.
And I know that the you can go to Savant and you can point to, oh, he would have had 24 home runs instead of 25 if he played every game at Miami, or name your park. But it's not that. It's but now he's 32 and he was never more than average raw power. It was already a guy that, he parked it in the second or third row every single time.
And
All
he's
of a
not a
sudden now
big,
it's not that.
and he's not a big exit velo guy anyway. We're talking
That's
about a
my
guy
point.
whose average exit velo is under 89 miles an hour, and it has been for the last 2 years. And he only has one season 89 or better, and that was 2021.
Yeah.
So this is a guy who's lifting and taking advantage of that ball.
He has a feel for the barrel, right? Yeah. He has a feel for that ideal launch angle. When he loses even a mile and a half from that average, he goes from a 25 home run guy to a 14 to 15 home run guy. And, then it's like, man, this guy better be hitting 285, 290 and, staying healthy. And I think at that point, it's like, I don't want to give $25 million to that.
Yeah, that's got to be the concern. Never been a big barrel rate guy. Career 5.5%. Was at 5.4 a year ago. Never been a high hard hit rate guy. 38% a year ago. 37% before that. 37% for his career. So he's not that guy that's like, well, he's just creaming the ball. We need to change this or that. He's actually maxing out everything, despite the fact that he doesn't necessarily hit the ball all that hard. Yeah, that's a decision they have to make. And you know what? Signing Josh Hader to a deal that's worth almost $20 million a year doesn't help the Houston Astros keep Alex Bregman.
That's my point. If Crane is going to stay under that, if Crane is going to stay comfortably under the luxuries tax, I don't know where you find $25 million for Alex Bregman. Kyle Tucker is right around the corner, and I would imagine they're going to want to keep him, and he's going to be a $30 million guy without even batting an eye.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a $200+ million contract waiting to happen, even as an extension. And he's got, I think he's got one more year of I think he's making 12 this year, this coming season, 2024. And he's got one more year of arbitration left before free agency. He just turned 27 years old. So if you sign him to an extension now, you'd be getting him for his age 27. If you signed him to 7 years, it'd be his age 27 to 33 seasons. He's getting $200+ million, even on an extension. If he gets to free agency, it might be 250.
He's twice the player Cody Bellinger is right now. And I don't mean that as a slam on Cody Bellinger. I mean, there's a lot of red flags in what Cody Bellinger does. That does not exist in Kyle Tucker.
Yeah, we just got done talking about like hard hit rates and barrel for Bregman, average exit velocity over 90 miles an hour every year of his career. Kyle Tucker, let's see, over 10% barrel rate, over 44% hard hit rate, and certainly peaking the last couple of years. He had an absolute monster. The last 3 years, by the way, I like to do this. 2021 through 2023 for Kyle Tucker. 278, 353, 517 with 89 bombs, 2 seasons of 30 homers and a season of 29. And he's played 140, 150, and 157 games. This is a borderline star in this league. This is a
I think he's a
perennial
star.
all-star. This is a guy who is top 10 MVP. This is a really good player. And I do think they're going to pay him. I do think.
How many stolen bases?
Let's see. He had 30 this past year and 25 a year ago. Yeah.
So he is a 25-25 guy without breaking a sweat.
Yeah, maybe he goes for 30-30 this year.
With an enormous arm in right field.
Yeah, good defender. Yeah, this is a complete player. The biggest thing for him, too, is he's gone from a guy who chased quite a bit early in his career and had some success despite that to a guy who, I mean, he just hit 284. Might end up hitting 300.
He's a stud.
Yeah, and we're talking about a high contact guy too. 15% strikeout, 14% strikeout. This is a really, really good player. Like he's not Ronald Acuna Jr., but he's in that tier right under the absolute superstars in the league. This is a really good player.
He's everything that George Springer was when George Springer left Houston to become a free agent. Everything and more.
Yeah, I'd say so. And probably a little more
player this year.
And probably a little more coveted around the league simply because he's left-handed.
Without question. And younger. I mean, he's going to be at least 2 years younger than when Springer went to free agency.
Was Springer a 30-year-old free agent?
I actually think he played his first year in Toronto at 31.
Yeah.
Maybe. Because he came out of the University of Connecticut. I don't think he actually debuted for the Astros until he was 23 and
let's see.
Maybe 24.
First year in Toronto was 20. I guess that would have been 2021. Yeah, he was 31. Yep, he was 31. 31 year old.
Tucker's going to be 29 in his first year on a new deal. At
least 2 years ahead. Yep, certainly. Really quick before we go, we talk a lot of draft with you, Joe. It's I'm not really sure why you don't know anything about the draft, but
I'm just out here making stuff up.
We talked a couple of months ago about a mock draft you posted at futurestarseries.com that was model based. And that was basically, kind of how what teams value in a player, whether it be athleticism or whether it be data or whether it be age. The age factor in the draft is a real thing. And I think there are a couple of questions that we could ask here, but I want to start with the 2024 class. I think the biggest thing that comes up and is the biggest topic of conversation when age of a player in a draft comes up is a prep player who's a little older than you'd like them to be. So maybe start with the 2024 class and talk about how, if there are there any players they're supposed to go round one, any players where this is a factor for them early, particularly in the prep class. You don't want to draft a 20-year-old high school player, right? Not in round one. That's a different player. That's a different human being than if he was 17, 18 years old, right? Are there players that could be impacted by this in the first round of the 2024 class?
I mean, a lot of the guys at the top of the 2024 class are class ups from 2025 in the first place. Like Connor Griffin is considered by most to be a top 10 player in the 2024 class. He was in 2025 and he classed up because he was going to be 19 and 4 months old in 2025. Now he's going to be 18 and 4 months old in 2024. It's just a lot more appealing profile. It's a lot younger. It's more on par with his peers, and that's why he did it. And you could say the same about Cam Caminiti, who is going to be, I think, 18.2 in this class because he was going to be 19 in 2025, and also Noah Franco, who's going to be, I think, 18.3 in this class because he was going to be 19.3 in 2025. So
these are all early picks. These are all early guys.
These are all top 40 picks. Yeah, these are all top 40 picks, and Caminiti and Connor Griffin could be top 15 picks. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. And you just look better on models. And especially if you're a kid that is 18 years old, or if you're a kid that is supposed to be drafted at 19 years old, if you're not absolutely bludgeoning and dominating the competition as a 19 and 3 months year old playing against 18 year olds, teams are going to see that and they're going to say, okay, if this 19 and a couple months year old isn't dominating high school ball, how are we supposed to trust him to dominate low A right out of the gates? And do we really want to stick a 19-year-old at the complex level only
What
for
are
him
you
to
going
play
to
his
learn there?
first full season at 20?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So for me personally, I think it is a much bigger impact on pitchers, high school pitchers, because the stuff just has to be so big for you to be drafted as a high school pitcher. I mean, actually, here's another way to look at it. Look at this 2024 class. Three of the top 100 guys on my board, at least, Tristan Smith at Clemson, Andrew Dukanich at Vanderbilt, and Eli Drzembic at South Carolina. They were all in my top 50 overall players in 2022. None of them got drafted. None of them got paid because teams are like, well, I don't want to pay a high school pitcher who's 19 years old $3.5 million to sit at the complex level as a 19-year-old and then play his first year at low A as a 20-year-old. It just
Right.
There's more incentive to pay an 18-year-old who is competing against the same kids and pumping the same stuff. So I get it. It sucks for those kids, but I get it.
Yeah, that's why we're seeing a lot of the reclassification stuff, and this has been going on for years. I mean, Bryce Harper did it, in a way, of crying out loud, by qualifying out of high school and then going to the College of Southern Nevada and being drafted as a 9-year-old. It seems that was. Have I ever told you about that? Like, I was at ESPN at that point, and watching Bryce Harper as, I'm trying to think how old he would have been. I guess he would have been 17. He was 17.
Yeah.
I think he turned 18 that October. But in February, March at College of Southern Nevada, he's 17 years old. And the first day I see him, he catches, because he was a catcher in high school. And dude could have caught. Like Bryce, I think that's the thing that people don't necessarily realize. If you're a younger fan, you don't realize in 2010, when Bryce Harper was, 17, 18 years old, he could have caught, like, the athleticism, but he caught the first night and looked every bit the part. Like, scouts were like, yep, like, this is a dude. This is a guy who can catch. And they'd go out and hit 3 doubles and a homer against, players that were 2 and 3 years older than he was at a JC. And it was against Chipola. It wasn't like he was playing some random, Southwest Missouri State, community college. He's playing some of the bigger, schools, and Chipola had a bunch of guys drafted, including LaVon Washington that year, by the way. And then the next day, Bryce Harper goes out there and plays center field. It's like, what in the world are we watching here? And looks every bit the part. And scouts are like, this is interesting. Okay. And then the next day he plays third base. 3 days in a row, he went catcher, center field, third base, raked every single time, wasn't getting a whole lot of hit the second couple of days. One of the most amazing displays of baseball, natural baseball ability. But he was one of the first guys that I can remember, anyway, that kind of reclassified in a way.
Yeah. And he would have won. They would have won the junior college championship if he didn't. I think it was against San Jacinto. He argued balls and strikes in game 1.
Yeah.
And he got suspended for the rest of the JUCO World Series. And his team lost like 10-0 in game 2.
He was really difficult to pitch to. He was, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because that was the only question about him. Is he going to be level-headed enough to develop and get to the big leagues to be able to handle all this? And when you think about that right now, like, it's amazing, by the way, that Bryce Harper's only 31 years old right now.
Yeah.
He's done.
I'm 33 and he's older than I am at 31, which is kind of incredible. He's
done everything. He's had an unbelievable, like, remarkable career. I mean, he's been worth almost 50 WAR already. He's 31 years old and he's still going. It's still going pretty strong, but he's been in the league forever. But yeah, that was the question. Like, is this just a hothead? Can we take the chance, on this guy? And he's one of the most, like, level-headed yet fierce competitors in all of Major League Baseball right now. I love Bryce Harper, but yeah, that was fun. So getting back to the age fact, it's a real thing. In your experience, with the information that you have, with the conversations that you have, do you get the sense that age, maybe sometimes in some instances with some clubs in some scenarios, is too much of a factor?
That's a good question. I think
Because really, what's the difference between 19.1 and 18.6? Really, I mean, it's a half a year. Like, how is that quantified? I guess that's the question. How are you quantifying this? Like, what
yeah, I
is
mean,
the
I
difference?
guess it depends on that's a great question. I think it depends on the player. Like you look at some players, like you look at Cole Young. When Cole Young was
Mhm.
drafted as a 19-year-old, Cole Young was small and hitterish
Mhm.
and cold weather, and like he had rawness about his game because he hadn't played as much ball as guys in Texas and California and Florida. So there's an aspect of training age there where it's like, okay, this guy he hasn't played as much baseball as some of his peers. He's kind of smaller still, and you see what he did in his first full year as a 20-year-old in 2023. He got much bigger. He got very comfortable. Some of the power started to come on once he got to
Mhm.
high A. So I think depending on something called training age, like where they've played, where they're coming from, I think teams will weigh that much differently than just normal age.
Like if
But
Cole Young was a kid who grew up in Texas and played in Texas and had a like maybe he gets drafted somewhere different, like maybe he goes 10 spots lower or something. Is that kind of like what you're
I
saying?
mean, if
Like
he grew up in
maybe
Texas or Florida or California, he might look different. He might be 10 pounds heavier. He might have developed game power. I think if Cole Young grew up in Texas, because he's only 6 foot, I think he probably goes in the 30 to 40 range. There are other examples of guys that were 19 or basically 19, like Jared
Mhm.
Kelnick and Colson Montgomery and Brett Beatty. Those guys were 19, but they were extremely physically developed, and you already knew that they were what they were supposed to look like as a 19-year-old. Cole Young is kind of the outlier because he looked like a 19-year-old, but he looked like an 18-year-old.
right.
So
Or a 17-year-old. Yeah,
or a
exactly.
17-year-old, yeah. But
Yeah.
then there's the other side of the coin too, where it's like I like using Seattle because it's of the proximity. Colt Emerson was a 6 foot 1 inch, 208-pound shortstop who was barely 18, and he was from Ohio, and he was killing the competition for Team USA. And because of his age, he shot way upwards, even though he's
Mhm.
probably just going to be a second or third baseman. So I know that got kind of confusing, but I think it just comes down to training age. Like, what does the body look like? What does the performance look like? If he is 19, is he already bludgeoning the competition? I think the one in that group that is most interesting to me is Colson Montgomery. Colson Montgomery was pretty raw and kind of soft bodied when he was taken by the White Sox at like 12 when he
Mhm.
was taken, and he was 19, and he actually didn't play for Team USA, and I don't think he was a major standout until the spring
Mhm.
on the tournament
I
circuit.
think he
So,
fell a little bit and went in the 20s, and that's why the White Sox got him. But you're right.
oh, did he go in the 20s? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like 22. I'm looking it up. It's 22 overall in 2021. But yeah, 6'3", 200, big kid. Shortstop all over his track record.
But still kind of
But he's the
gangly
guy.
and wonky when he was drafted. I remember watching him in like March and April, and it was like the swing was still kind of disconnected, but there was a ton of bat speed.
And he was
That's
19
kind
and a
of
half
the
years old.
that's kind of the outlier where it's and credit to Colson. He's shot up the minors. He's been a little
Mhm.
hurt, but he shot up the minors. He might debut this year. He might play shortstop still. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
the
we haven't
Corey
seen the
Seager
power with him
comparisons,
yet, by the way.
not what it could become. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, this is a kid with legitimate bat speed. But there is hit tool here. That's fun. Because
yeah,
that's one of the things you worry about. Like he's older, so you kind of want to challenge him a little bit. But do you challenge him, a little too much and he struggles to develop? Because you want a kid that's 6'3", 210 to hit the ball out of the ballpark a little bit if you can. You at
yeah.
least want him to be Lorenzo Cain or something in that way. Even if he sticks to shortstop, you want him to be able to hit 15 homers. We haven't really seen that in the minors. I think he hit 8 last year, I believe, which was one more than or 2 fewer actually than he hit the previous year. But he got all the way to Double A at 21 years old. So that's an interesting one. Um,
Looking
because it kind
back,
of doesn't that go against kind of what would necessarily suggest, yeah, he's 19, but let's go ahead and take him? Because if he was 6'3" and 175, like I'm like, well, he's okay. Like he's 19, but like he's gonna add 20 pounds in the next 3 years. Like I see the physical projection here. But if he's already 190 or 195 pounds, like that's a different story, right? So the White Sox kind of went against convention and just tried to draft
He's
a
a
baseball
weird
player.
one.
Yeah.
He's a weird one. I mean, there are things like, so 19 and a half at the draft, still kind of awkward and gangly. He just wasn't dominating his competition. He was in Indiana, but he wasn't on the show. He wasn't against top tier arms. He wasn't showing power yet. But then you look at it, it's like, well, he's from Indiana. He's committed to the University of Indiana. Signability should be no issue. Nobody, all due respect to the Hoosiers, Indiana does not hold its baseball commits if they have pro commitments.
Sure.
Yeah, looking back, he'll be an interesting case study because he probably goes against all of the age requisites that you and I were just talking about.
Yeah. And he got over slot. He got $3 million. So
That's
the
a lot.
White Sox really felt like this was the guy, despite the age thing, despite there weren't a lot of obvious conclusions you could come to with a kid like that. So they certainly took a chance if that works out.
To their credit, he's worked out to this point.
Last year combined in at 3 spots, including 45 plate appearances in the complex league to get going. He hit almost 300 with over 400 on base and plenty of power to believe in. He just didn't play a lot. If he has a full season in 2024, we might see that 15, 18 home runs occur. So that'd be an interesting one to watch. Got to write him on the whiteboard and keep track of him. Joe, one of my favorite things about baseball in general is the waves that everything comes in. The amateur season kicks off in February in most parts of the country, March for some others, even April in some northern areas. But we certainly get D1 baseball. We get JUCO baseball in late January, February. That's coming up, my friend. So everyone needs to check out futurestarseries.com over the next month or so as we roll out organizational top 30 prospects, top 100 prospects. Joe's draft boards are going to all get updated, I believe, 2024, 2025, and 2026. Is that correct, Joe? All 3 classes are going to get updated. So lots of stuff there. We may have some cool notes and stuff to share from the JUCO Showdown this weekend. But just as all that really gets rolling in February and March, we get to kick off the big league season and the minor league season. Joe, do you like the March opening days, by the way? You like starting the season a little bit early? We've had a couple of those the last couple of years. And while I hate the weather, the thing that we battle with the weather, sometimes, man, it's like it gets to March 18, March 20, and I'm like, freaking spring training is way too long. Just start the season already.
You know what I love? I love a March 30th opening day, and I hate the AL East. Just pretty much the entire division.
Yeah. Although when you're talking about weather, if that's what you're getting at.
They never play opening day.
But Tampa, and they should, because Tampa and Toronto can roof the place, right? I mean, they're the ones that should.
Yeah, but the Major League Baseball for some reason schedules a home opener in Minnesota on March 20. Dude, do you realize
Minnesota? Yeah, Chicago.
Do you realize in spring training, Robbie Ray is 93 to 95, touching 7 last year.
Mm-hmm.
In 85-degree weather, pitching 3-4 outings.
Yep.
And he's asked 3 days later to go throw 5 innings in 36-degree windy conditions in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, I can't believe it happened, he got hurt.
I mean, the Giants, Joe, just can't catch a break. You see what I did there? Yeah. I like that deal, by the way. We didn't really talk about that deal, but I like what the Giants did there. That was really interesting. All right, maybe we'll get Jeremy Booth on next week. We'll talk about this JUCO Showdown and a little bit more about the class of 2024, maybe even the class of 2025. One thing I want to do, Joe, as we move forward and get closer to the draft is start thinking about the 2024 class and even 25, 26, if you have the information on it, and I'm betting you do. Comparing it to the class of 2023. I think that can be really interesting in terms of what the strengths and weaknesses are overall. what the demographics look like. It seems like there are a lot of hitters that are going in the top half of this year's of the round this year, but I'd like to dig into some of that if we could